have to do this. Said I'd do it. Going to do it. I need to do it. It's time. Anyone who's followed this channel for the last year or so has seen that I have an obvious affection for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMO from Visionary Realms that has its roots in EverQuest and other social-focused MMOs. I have talked about my excitement for this game and how my hopes for this game really at length. There's a lot of videos on this, but there's something I haven't told you. There's a deep, dark secret that's been deep in my chest for so long. Years even. I have concerns about the game in general. Like with any game, I have healthy concerns about what it may be or some of the pitfalls that they may be running headfirst into or may already be in. It's the same kind of concerns when I covered Ashes of Creation. There's things that are out there that give me a little bit of trepidation. I have identified 5 concerns, and in this video, I'm going to elaborate on each one. I invite you to engage in respectful conversation right down here in the comment section. Be kind to each other, but feel free to debate. Disagree with me. Hell, convince me that I'm wrong and that I can just put these concerns to bed. Before we get started and half of them unsubscribe, I want to thank the channel members down here who have been so supportive of the channel over the last couple of months. I really appreciate you. Help keep the channel going. Just thank you so much. I just appreciate you. I am humbled every time I enter the names on this list. So just thank you very much. While the repeated timeframes for development that get thrown around for Pantheon aren't always accurate, time in development is still a concern. Pantheon began its Kickstarted journey in 2014. And while that doesn't mean that back then the type of development cadence we expect from like a fully funded game began at that time, that's going to be the date that a lot of people look at. Personally, I look at 2 dates. The first listed video on their YouTube channel pre-alpha gameplay, which was about 6 years ago, and the first archived PantheonMMO.com instance, which was September of 2015. Now, this is all splitting hairs, but the facts are there. Pantheon has been in development for a long time, between 7 to 8 years. Now, MMOs do take a long time to make. Throne and Liberty, a AAA MMO, for example, began development in 2011, but that's not going to soothe the masses. Patience is wearing thin, even with some of the most supportive Pantheon backers. All you need to do is take a look in the comment section of any Pantheon video, official or not. It's not just the patience I'm worried about though, and it's not the game system seeming to be outdated either. Those are both concerns, but for me, it's competition and an aging and increasingly immobile player base that worries me. Pantheon was at the vanguard of what Massively OP calls the Kickstarter era, from 2015 to 2019 in the MMO space. This followed the end of the big MMO era that launched most of the games still out today and are currently still dominating the market, from World of Warcraft, which launched in 2004, to Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, which launched in 2012 and 2010 respectively. Since then, it feels like MMOs have become a bit less sticky. Most MMO players in today's day and age are more like tourists. They will leave their home MMO to test out the new thing only to quickly return. New World boomed to almost 1 million subscribers and crashed to a low peak of 25,000. Lost Ark passed 1.3 million players and collapsed to 250,000. For both games, this was in less than a year. MMO players are interested in a new MMO, but the pull of their home games are intense. With every passing year that Pantheon does not launch, 2 things are happening. We are inching closer to Riot's MMO, Blizzard's new survival MMO, Throne and Liberty, aka Lineage 3, and perhaps other unannounced projects. Games that are long in the tooth like Lord of the Rings Online are looking at remastering their game, and even newer games like Final Fantasy XIV are already talking about revamps. So you've got your competition on the wings. But I talked about the population becoming immobile and returning to your home game. Well, players are growing deeper roots in their home games, and they're more difficult to pull out. It's hard to leave a game you spent 5 to 10 years in, unless that game pushes you away. So you have to worry about not just your pull factor, Is your game good? But also the push factor of the other game. Is the other game making mistakes? Are they pushing players away? We saw it when Shadowlands was, for lack of a better term, a kind of a shitty expansion. Where did a lot of those players go? There was a mass exodus to Final Fantasy XIV. It was kind of a perfect storm of, well, Final Fantasy XIV was doing things well, and World of Warcraft was doing things bad. And then you had on top of that a bunch of controversies all around Blizzard, and Final Fantasy XIV just seemed like a good home for a lot of people to go to. Now, a lot of this is going to be out of the hands of the devs in Pantheon, but it's still something that worries me, especially when you see how boom and bust cycles work. Will they be prepared? Will they be prepared for that kind of big burst of people coming in? Can they capitalize on that revenue? And then can they continue when the population shrinks back down? I mentioned playstyle briefly in my previous concern, so let's dig into that a little bit. Will the playstyle be something a large enough portion of the population want to play? While I personally love the idea of limited action bars and tab targeting, more and more games are moving to action combat and have been for years. With a few exceptions, most MMOs over the last half decade or so have all opted for action combat in some form. Games like ESO and Guild Wars 2 have in some ways split the difference while leaning into action combat. Games like BDO have redefined MMO combat with combo system. Perhaps most telling though is the advent of console MMOs, or at least ports to them, and age-old tab targeting MMOs like World of Warcraft adding an action targeting system. If the two largest tab targeting MMOs on the market, Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, offer a pseudo action combat style for more broad appeal and console adoption, will the appetite for the more old school tab targeting system still be prevalent enough? And it's the fundamentals of the tab targeting system that could also be an issue. They tend to be slower and more strategic. It's more important in tab targeting to know exactly what you're fighting and that your skills will hit that target. For me, this is the EQ model of gameplay in a lot of ways, but it's not for everyone, and perhaps the reasoning for tab targeting might not be either. Pantheon is looking like a game where decisions will matter and combat will be slower and more committed. This is the appeal to many Pantheon backers, but for every former EverQuest player that really likes locking down 5 mobs the puller accidentally pulled because they weren't really paying attention because they're watching Netflix as well, well, there's another player or players who love spamming AoEs through their 10 to 15 minute dungeon run in Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft through the Dungeon Finder. Speaking of locking down mobs though, WoW brought in the holy trinity of the tank, healer, and DPS. I say this because before this in EverQuest there was a quaternity: tank, healer, DPS, and CC. CC, crowd control, or support, has been a bit of a forgotten role in modern MMOs, especially when they try to deviate from class specialization into more do-it-all solo-friendly playstyles. How will a new audience of MMO players react to being functionally unable to complete tasks that another class might be able to? How will players react when they need to CC mobs instead of pulling them all at once and slaughtering them? Will pulling and splitting on a monk turn off your MMO tourist from WoW, BDO, or ESO? Many of us are clamoring for this type of gameplay, but that doesn't mean the larger market will. This is where I have to shift away from my wants and needs and consider, what do most MMO players seem to want? MMOs have gone in a certain trajectory for a reason. It's profitable and sustainable. We can say all we want that this game isn't for them, but that's not really a good answer. It's the kind of answer that it gets thrown around a lot with players who want a specific type of game, and they want that game to be built towards them. I am one of those players, and I have been one of those players to say that in the past, but it doesn't work from a marketing perspective. We can say all that we want, that the game isn't built for everyone, but you can't play the game with no one to play with. And as subscriptions falter, the game won't last either, and you definitely won't get expansions. And moving on to my third reason. When I mentioned my concerns about asset creation, I talked about player-generated content. Much of that game was relying on the population creating its own content through PvP, node construction, destruction, etc. With Pantheon, it's not the player generation requirement that concerns me, even if a healthy grouping population will be needed. No, what has me dreadfully concerned is the amount of content. MMOs are difficult to fill. Even MMOs with much larger teams and much larger budgets like New World have struggled with content. Copy and paste villages, reused ad nauseum art assets, Small server sizes and worlds and a general lack of questing options and group content plagued the game, and they had both money and time. Other traditional MMOs have crumbled under the weight of expectations of players who will devour content far faster than devs can create it. Other forms of content like travel sound great, but they rarely deter players from moving in a straight line from level 1 to max, and if the content is found lacking, those players will move on, and word of mouth of an empty game will be detrimental. Many of you watching have played through several MMOs. How many do you remember dying off because they lacked an endgame? We aren't going to redefine player behavior between now and the launch of Pantheon. Content, lots of it, will be needed to get from the launch to the first expansion, or players will abandon it within a few months. Okay, so it kind of feels like cheating here talking about graphics. I talked about graphics with Ashes of Creation, and I'm talking about it again here, but in reverse. Does this invalidate my concerns for either game? Well, no, damn it. And here's why. My concerns with Pantheon is that while they've definitely gone for less stunning visuals than Ashes, making it potentially more accessible, they haven't gone the route of a World of Warcraft with their artistic take. Pantheon graphics are pseudo-realistic, and these types of games tend to age faster. A good example of this is EverQuest 2, which hasn't aged very well. Rather than go with a stylized look, EverQuest 2 tried to go for a realistic look, but in 2022, at least to me, it feels a bit like claymation. I wouldn't say that any Pantheon screenshot has been particularly stunning graphically, and while we may point out that it's not even in alpha yet, the game has been in development for a long time. We've seen graphical updates, and in short order, we should be seeing all of the updated race models. Humans are looking better, but they aren't going to make anyone gasp in the way Throne and Liberty or Ashes of Creation will. To some, these graphics will seem outdated the moment the game releases. And while in general for MMO players over the years we've seen that gameplay is more important than graphics, the latter are still going to be important. Graphics are a game's first impression. Do we need to look any further than the most recent reactions from some creators that largely judge Pantheon based off of UI and graphical elements? Whoever said don't judge a book by its cover never bought a book. For example, look at these two books. Which of these books are you most likely to buy? First impressions are important to a lot of people, and you just can't discount it. My final concern is about complexity and over-reliance on discovery. These were interlinked for me, so I wanted to do them together as a single concern. Let's start with complexity. This honestly wasn't a concern of mine until recently. This could in some ways go along with content, but there's a distinct difference here I want to talk about. While reactions to some of the recent Parting the Veils have been mostly positive, I've seen a lot of chatter about complexity. Specifically in the last Parting the Veil that covered travel skills like the Druid's Vine Bridge, the Summoner's Raft, etc., a viewer pointed out that frustrations that could arrive if group building was too complex. For example, not only did you need a DPS, but maybe you wanted a DPS that has a specific travel ability versus another DPS. Would you, for example, take a summoner and a rogue over a rogue and a rogue? Because at least you have two different abilities. This added complexity sounds fun and interesting, but it can also lead to too much funneling and freezing out of group making. I'm aware Pantheon is working to make sure multiple playstyles work together and multiple group loadouts work as well, but MMO players tend to optimize. As much as we tie MMOs to D&D, most of us still seek out efficiency, especially when there's kind of a time sink in the game. Gear scores and DPS meters exist for a reason. When World of Warcraft released their new talent trees just recently, there were best builds exportable from Wowhead within moments. Icy Veins exist just to min-max your MMO characters. Even older games like EverQuest and Ultima Online had ZAM and Stratix. And speaking of those sites, they're coming for Pantheon. That's just how the nature of our internet age works. Mystery only exists in an MMO, an RPG, or any game for people that want the mystery. Mystery and discovery have been talked about a lot with Pantheon, and this appeals to a large portion of Pantheon's audience, myself included. Players who had that sense of discovery in their first MMO. My concern isn't Pantheon trying to include discovery. It's very important. What it is that I'm worried about an over-reliance on it for customer satisfaction, when the secrets will be exposed within 24 hours of the game launching. And if they aren't because they're so hidden, the majority of your audience probably won't ever find them. Obfuscating the mysteries isn't going to stop the machine that is gaming guide websites. Even the systems in Pantheon in place that are specifically meant to handle this, I'm not certain they're going to be able to work in a way that can maintain that mystery, because I don't think that there is a way to do that anymore. I don't think in this day and age we can have that mystery unless you just want it and avoid those things, like avoiding spoilers. There you have it. My concerns for the MMO that I have the most interest in of any upcoming MMO. It is probably the MMO that I look at and see, that's a game that I want to play for me, not just for this channel, but strictly for me. I would love to know what you think, so please leave it down in the comments below. And if you want to see why I'm also concerned about Ashes of Creation, the other big kickstarted MMO that's potentially coming out in the next couple of years, take a look over here. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you giving me the gift of your time today. I hope you enjoy the video, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.